IBM.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ibmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ibmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
In Hawaii, we had an experience with dolphins where we were going around the north shore of the oldest island there, Kauai. And I really, really, really wanted to experience swimming with the dolphins. And on the way out, there were no dolphins. And so on the way back, just kept praying, please come, please come, please come. We're all part of Mother Nature. And this, again, is Native American, but it is also Vedic teaching, the Upanishads, the Vedas, and it's actually a teaching amongst all cultures, especially indigenous and all religions, if you strip away all of the other stuff. We're all connected, and we all have the ability to reconnect through what Native Americans would call the Great Spirit. And by concentrating and meditating and putting out this request to a particular species with a particular agreement, they can and do receive it, and they will honor it. A lot of dolphins with lots of babies came, and we were able to switch off the motor of our floating Zodiac boat and get into the water and swim with the dolphins.
Hello and welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast. They say that you can plant 1,000 trees, but that does not make a forest. A forest is an entire ecosystem of interdependence between flora and fauna, where everything is interconnected. From the tiniest of insects to the largest of predators, to the trees, to the soil, and to the water sources. The rules of a game that are evolved over thousands of years. My guest today, Pamela Gale Malhotra, is someone who has created and brought up a forest like a mother would a child. The sanctuary that she and her husband set up over a 30-year journey is called the SAI Sanctuary, or the SAI Sanctuary, set over hundreds of acres over the hills of Coorg. Today, SAI is home to Bengal tigers, Asian elephants, the giant Malabar squirrel, and otters. I spoke to Pamela for over 90 minutes over a conversation that felt more like meditation in itself. I spoke to her about growing up in New Jersey, what she learned from her Native American ancestors, and the journey that brought her to India, and how over 3 decades, she and her husband Anil built a relationship with that land and recreated a vegetation that is so native to it, tree by tree. Most importantly, I spoke to her about how this girl who grew up in New Jersey in the 50s grew up with a dream to create a wildlife sanctuary. Stay with us. We'll be right back on the Filter Koffee Podcast.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IBM Podcast Network. On Cyrus Says, Cyrus is joined by Utsav Mamoria, host of Postcards from Nowhere, comedian Kajal Srinivasan, and Antarikshan, This Cock and Bull. They examine everything from Sri Lanka cancelling exams due to paper and ink shortage to India's rank in the World Happiness Index. Let me tell you about a new show that I'm super excited about. It's called Ek Chuski Finance. It's a finance podcast made for women by financial expert Priyanka Acharya. She simplifies complex financial concepts in an easy-to-learn manner. To top it off, the show is available in 8 languages. Tune in every Tuesday for fresh episodes. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam meets Sandeep Jethwani. Sandeep is the co-founder at Deserve. They talk about how Deserve is creating long-term portfolios for working professionals. On All Things Policy, the Takshashila folk analyze the findings of the PEW survey on gender roles in Indian society. On the Life Manifesto, Zarina reiterates how important it is for women to uplift other women and shares how they can go about doing so. And on Marathi Kirkitun, the Deshmukhs explore the sixth sense in animals and humans and why it makes them extraordinary. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. And don't forget to rate us on any of the platforms you're listening to us on. Also, remember, we're on YouTube. You can check us out on ivmpodcast.com/survey and get a list of all the YouTube channels we have active at this point. I'd also like to make a quick note that we're doing a small listener survey, and it would really help us if you could fill that out. You can go to ivmpodcast.com/survey. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors this week, SBI Life Insurance and India Water Portal. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome to the Filter Koffee Podcast, Pamela. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and thank you so much for this opportunity to interact with you. It's a pleasure.
The pleasure is entirely ours. Pamela, this conversation is likely to be as much about you as it is about the place from which you're talking to us from, which is, of course, your sanctuary. Why don't you begin by telling us where you're talking to us from in your own words?
I'm talking to you from the sanctuary that my husband and I set up in Coorg, or the Kodagu district of Karnataka. The sanctuary is called SAI Sanctuary, but the SAI is an acronym standing for Save Animals Initiative. So it's, and also the roots of the word Sai actually mean universal mother. So our sanctuary is the sanctuary of the universal mother, Mother Nature, mother of us all.
Oh, wonderful. So, which language is that?
Sanskrit.
In Sanskrit.
Wow. Okay, Sanskrit with a little touch of imagination. So.
Pamela, you grew up in North America and you're part Native American. Tell us about your early years. Where did you grow up, and what are some of the things that you grew up with which shaped you?
I was very fortunate to grow up, in my opinion, at the time I grew up, and also in the area I grew up. I grew up in what was then relatively rural New Jersey. And I was very fortunate that our home and the land we had bordered the very large wooded estate of a man who loved children. And so he allowed us kids to run around in his forested area all the time, or do snow sledding down his big hill. His name was Eisner. His great-grandson ended up becoming the CEO of Disney, just as an aside there, Disney Productions. It's quite a philanthropist. So I grew up outside, barefoot, running around, climbing trees. My nickname was Monkey because I was always in trees and hanging down from branches. And I loved being in the forest because of being able to play, but also I absolutely loved observing wildlife. And in those forests, we had a lot of birds and a lot of small mammals, sometimes the occasional small deer coming by. So it was a very lovely childhood. And from the time period, we're talking about late 50s, 60s, 1960s, children were still allowed to be children then. We were able to play outside. We didn't have to worry about coming in too early, especially in the summertime when sun would set after 7 p.m. It was what I would say to be a bit of a more innocent time. And so I felt very, very lucky to have been born during that time period, and especially near Mr. Eisner's woods and hills, because they are really what helped to set my feet on the path of loving wildlife, along with the influence of my mom. My mom was part Native American Indian of the Osage tribe, and she absolutely loved nature and animals, all kinds of animals, including all kinds of wildlife. And so she was a wonderful influence for me. For example, if there was a comet shower, a meteor shower outside, she would have her folding lounge chair out there and lie on her back for hours just watching the meteors go by and the falling stars everywhere. That image in my mind, it was always something that I loved. She also loved the water, so we were always by the ocean. and enjoying the ocean. And she taught me respect for wildlife too. And also the concept that when one goes into nature, one should offer a small offering to Mother Nature. It's a way of saying thank you for everything that she gives to us free of charge. So that was where I first learned how to make little seed balls for birds during the wintertime to help them over the coldest times of years there when they don't have a lot of insects to rely on for food, or when we had rabbits that would be around, or squirrels. There was just a lot of life in the area when I was growing up, and it was a joy to partake of that and observe it. So I was very lucky, in my opinion. So that's years.
In a very fascinating way. Pam, you mentioned about your mom's side of the family being Native American. What kind of values did you grow up with specifically from that culture, especially around, being one with nature and the things that you imbibed very early on in your life?
Well, I think one of the most important things was to respect nature. It was recognizing that there were all kinds of creatures that had been created by the Creator, and they all had their own particular place and space in nature's play, in nature's scene. And that was very important to understand as a young person. Another thing that I remember very vividly that my mother showed me at a very young age was the connection between forests and water. I remember going to my godmother's home in Staten Island, New York, and I asked her for a glass of water after running around outside in her backyard. And when I was given the water and I tasted it, it tasted weird. It tasted funny. It didn't taste like my water at home at all. And I told my aunt, this water tastes funny. So when I got back to my home in Red Bank, I told my mother about the weird tasting water. And she said, that's because they're relying on non-naturally cleansed water. And then she explained to me that the forests of Eisner's Hill were helping to produce the water and to cleanse it. And that the water we were drinking from was from an artesian well below Eisner's Hill. And so we were drinking tremendously pure underground water, whereas the water I was drinking up at my aunt's place was surface water that had all kinds of chemicals, et cetera, dumped into it, trying to purify it of all the chemicals that we dump into it in every other industry, whether it's farming or manufacturing, whatever. So that was a very, very interesting early experience that my mother helped to teach me. And she also was really good about teaching not to waste anything, that everything is precious, including your water, but also your food. And so I learned about composting from childhood, composting all of our food scraps, composting leaves, composting grass cuttings, and all of this, which she would turn and make into a lovely hummus that would be used in our gardens, our organic gardens that she grew every year during the warm periods. And they produced plenty of vegetables and beautiful flowers, etc. So that was another very important lesson that she helped me to understand. So that gives you some idea.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what did you want to do at that point in time, with your life? What was the dream, and how did things bring you to India?
Well, the dream I had in my life was to have a forest sanctuary like Eisner's Woods. I wanted to be able to have something like Eisner's Woods where I was surrounded by forests, I was surrounded by wildlife, so that I could be fascinated and enjoy the wonder and the beauty of wildlife all the time. Because I was always fascinated by either the bird songs or butterflies coming by, or just sitting and listening to the sound of the wind through the leaves of the trees. That was an extraordinary experience, listening to that silence and then feeling yourself uplifted when the sound of the wind would blow through. And just a little bit of a joke of an aside, my maiden name, my parents' last name was Gale, as in wind. So, I identified with the wind well. The other thing that I really wanted in my forest sanctuary was water. My mother's father, who was the Native American link, he had a house on a hill in the woods, in a more wooded area of New Jersey even, and there was a stream below. And whenever we went to visit him, I was always at that stream. I just loved the sound of water. It's nature making its own symphony at its best. So that was the other major element that was very important for me in my dream of a forest sanctuary.
And how did life bring you to India?
Well, in my hometown, my husband actually opened an Indian food restaurant. He was one of the first Indians in the area, and it was certainly the first Indian restaurant in the area. And in America, it's not uncommon. In fact, it's very common for high school kids to have to go to work to help earn money for college. So my younger sister was working for my future husband as a waitress in his restaurant. And I happened to meet him when I went to the restaurant to get the car keys from her to drive to one of my summer jobs while I was home from college on summer break. And that's how I ended up meeting my husband. I saw him in the distance. He was near the kitchen door, and it was his eyes. It was his eyes. I just kind of fell into his eyes. But then there was a woman dressed in a sari with two little kids near her. And so I thought to myself, bad luck. He's already married. But he saw me too. And he ended up asking my younger sister where I was working. And he came down to the restaurant where I was working that night and asked me out. And I told him, I'm sorry, but I don't date married men. And he said, who the heck is married? And I said, I thought you were. And he said, I'm not married. And I said, well, then who was the woman in the sari with two kids? And he said, that was my partner's wife. And she's not Indian. She's Jewish American. So she was in a sari because of the restaurant. So in any case, that's how things started. And we started dating. I was going to college in Colorado at that time because of the beauty in Colorado. It's really, the Rocky Mountains are spectacular. And so I would not move back to New Jersey. So my husband sold his restaurant and followed me to Colorado.
Wow.
And yeah, and he had a very successful restaurant. And when asked, why are you selling a successful business like this? His reply was love before money. And so he drove all the way out and met me out there and was there for my graduation. And that's how our lives started together. Then he was a lawyer. He'd gone to Bombay Law College, got his degree, went to Grinley National Bank, where he had to go to the London Institute of Banking. So he had all kinds of different backgrounds and ended up working with a mortgage banking firm to help people refinance their properties. And this was when women were just starting to really break into the business scene. You're talking early 1970s. And he was really good helping get women refinancing for their buildings so that they could renovate them. And it was all on commission. So he worked very, very hard, and many things did not go through. But those that did, that's what started us on our way to the realization of my dream, from a dream to a reality, as far as the forest sanctuary is concerned, because he was able to bring in the money to turn that into a reality. It took years, but that's where the money basically came from. And then we went to Hawaii, where on our honeymoon, and fell in love with the Big Island and found some land there, which is spectacular land up against the forest preserve, forest with 2 streams with 2 waterfalls, the biggest waterfalls on the Big Island, Akaka Falls and Kahuna Falls. And it took us years, but we bought that and made that into our first forest sanctuary. That's where we also learned about growing organically in an even bigger way from our very dear Filipino friend, whose family was, all they had to do was look at things and they would grow. They were such green thumbs. And so that was our first small forest sanctuary. We had about a little less than 40 acres, but it was all surrounded by reserve forest. So it was a lot more than that in that respect. Then we ended up back in India because in 1985, my mother-in-law sent a telegram to my husband, Anil, telling him that his father was not well. Anil's father was of Indian origin, but an American citizen. And Anil's mother, on the other side, had left worldly life and had gone into spiritual life and was the mother of an ashram in Pune, here in India. Anil's dad went and retired and spent the last few years of his life at the ashram. So that's why we ended up coming back to India, was because he was unwell. And so we came back in January of 1986, and Dad did pass away about 6 months later. After Dad passed away, we were entrusted with Dad's asti to take his ashes, etc., up to Haridwar for immersion in the holy Ganga, which we did. And we fell in love with the Himalayas. It reminded us both, of course, of the Rocky Mountains, but in many areas, there were far more different types of trees. There was more biodiversity up there than what you would see in the Rocky Mountains. So it was very beautiful. So that gives you an idea of how we ended up coming to India. And we wanted to replicate what we had done in Hawaii here in India. And we tried to do that in the Himalayas. At that time, the area we were, the Uttarkashi region, was part of Uttar Pradesh. Uttaranchal or Uttarakhand had not been established yet. The fight to establish it went on while we were there, but it hadn't been established. And there were land sealing laws there that a family could only own 12 acres. One family could only own 12 acres. And that wasn't enough for us to do what we wanted to do. We still have some forest land up there back against the forest preserve that you see sloth bear and things like that, black bear on periodically, and other animals, but it wasn't enough land. So then my husband came down south and searched for land down here. And he went through Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Kerala, Goa, and then Karnataka. And he finally, on his last trip to Karnataka, was told about the land here that ended up becoming the heart of our sanctuary and the very first piece that would be bought to create the sanctuary here. If I can back up just a little bit, in 1986, within 3 weeks of arrival in India, we were actually in the Kodagu district. We were at Nagarhole National Park. And it was during that visit that we happened to meet the then wildlife warden of the park, K.M. Chinappa, who is a Kodava. And we also met there Ulas Karant and some others. They were all working on setting up Project Tiger. Mm-hmm. And we told them what we had done in Hawaii and what we were hoping to do here. And it was Chinapa that really urged us to do what we were going to do in Kodagu or Kur. But with Dad's passing on and all, fate took us up to the Himalayas for 10 years. But we came full circle and finally ended up coming down here.
You were meant to, isn't it?
Yeah, we were meant to. But everything seems to be timed the way it's supposed to be timed.
Right. Yeah. Of course, we're talking about Anil, who, would be your life partner for yes. half a century, right? Yes. And your partner in most crimes that yes. you've done. But, I want to back up a little bit, right? We spoke about Hawaii, and when you said that the dream was to build a sanctuary, you make it sound very simple. What does that mean? How do sanctuaries get built? Like, whether it is in Hawaii or whether it is in Kodagu, yes, you buy land and you buy a large part of, and what I'm assuming is probably virgin land. And how do you make it into a sanctuary? What goes in?
All right. In Hawaii, the land we ended up buying was not what you would really call virgin. It was not primary forest. It was land that had been chopped down years earlier and had come back to a certain degree because the landowners after that did not use the land for anything. So Mother Nature stepped in and sowed her seeds of different trees, etc. But the trees there were what you call vaivi. It's a small type of guava. And the forests were quite tangled and things along that line. So it wasn't primary forest, but it was recovering forest. But
what is it recovering from?
It's recovering from man's abuse. Recovering from man's abuse, where people have just gone in and wholesale slashed and burned. And that is, unfortunately, the common way that tropical forests in particular, whether it's Hawaii or whether it's here in India and other equatorial rainforests, because most of India does fall in the equatorial rainforest belt. That's why, one of the major reasons why we have so much diversity here in comparison, as I was saying, even the Himalayas to the Rocky Mountains, because of where we are closer to the equator. So in Hawaii, it was a question of trying to recover from that. Now, the other thing was helping the land recover by encouraging natural animals to come to the property. This protection of the land itself will mean that wildlife will eventually come around because they're not being hunted. They're not stepping into traps. They're not getting their necks caught in snares. They know that there are people there that are protecting them from hunters and from logging. And so they gravitate to those places because they want to avoid humans as much as possible. So that was one example of one of the things that we did in Hawaii because hunting was legal there. You could hunt all kinds of things. Now, you weren't supposed to hunt or kill endemic species because Hawaii has a terrible loss of its native species because of man's intrusion again. And here in the Western Ghats, we have major losses for the same reason: hunting, illegal logging, deforestation. But
sorry, what do you call them terrible loss?
Oh, wow. Well, I don't know if I'm going to be getting my stats correct, but Hawaii has the very unenviable title of the extinction capital of the United States of America. Okay, they have lost, I don't even know what the percentage is. It's in my book, but I can't remember right now. Right. 50%, 70% of their Native American species. And to give you an idea of how pristine the place was before humans, before the Polynesians or the Tahitians or whoever ended up landing there first. When the islands were uninhabited by humans, there were no mosquitoes, no flies, no cockroaches, no rats, no dogs, no pigs, nothing. It was pristine beauty. After the Polynesians ended up coming and established Hawaii there, they were the ones that brought dogs. They brought pigs. They probably brought mosquitoes and flies with them too, perhaps cockroaches. And now it's a question as to who brought the rats. For a long time, they thought it was Captain Cook and his crew with the ships, and the rats got off, and that's how they got. Others are saying, no. It came way back with the Polynesians. The point is, some human brought rats. And because of the absolutely isolated nature of the forests there in Hawaii, the birds, so many of them were ground nesting birds. They did not build their nests in the trees like you find in most places where you have predators of birds. But not in Hawaii. There were so many ground nesting birds because there were not the predators that they had to be worried about. Well, once humans came in, and especially once rats came in, the rats devoured the eggs of the ground nesting birds. And that has led to an incredible amount of extinction of native species of Hawaiian birds. Now, when the British came and they saw the situation, they thought that they were going to fix the situation, right? We will introduce another species to prey on the rats. So they brought from India the Indian mongoose, okay? And put the Indian mongoose in the Hawaiian Islands. Well, there's only one problem with that. The rats come out at night. The mongoose comes out in the day. The two never meet. In addition to which, mongoose, what is the main thing for mongoose? Snakes. And there are no snakes in Hawaii, or at least there weren't when we were there. So now you have another species that has to survive, that man has introduced. And since it couldn't meet the rats to clean up the rat mess, it turned to eating eggs of more ground nesting birds, causing more extinctions. This is what happens so often, or at least has happened so often, when man thinks he knows better than nature and he's going to fix it, et cetera, and the situation gets even worse. So that gives you an idea of what's happened with Hawaii. Here in the Western Ghats, we faced a similar situation of poachers, a lot of poaching, and terrible deforestation. I mean, sandalwood in this area used to be everywhere before we arrived. By the time we had arrived, sandalwood had almost completely disappeared from our area of the Western Ghats. Where we are located in Karnataka, we're only 5 kilometers away from the Kerala border. So it's very easy for people to cut, kill, and cart. You kill the wildlife, you cut the trees, and then you cart it through the forest to Kerala. And then the forest department, the Karnataka police, they can't do anything to stop it. So that has always been one of our major challenges. And it has gone down, both the illegal poaching and logging has gone down tremendously since we have arrived, because we stop. We call the police. We've created and developed a relationship between the police department and their anti-poaching squad, as well as the forest department too. My ears and my nose are very good warning signals. I can hear shots very far away. And from a forest fire point of view, my husband would joke and say I could smell smoke all the way to Biranani, which is like so many kilometers away from us. But
was he incorrect?
No, he wasn't incorrect. My senses, because I attribute this blessing, because it is a blessing, again, to Mother Nature, and having spent so much of my life in nature. When you live in a city, you have to close off your senses to a certain degree because they're constantly being assaulted, whether it's your eyes with things that are terrible, or the pollution, or the noise, or the smells. I mean, even the feeling at times of the air can feel sooty or polluted. But in nature, nothing assaults the senses. Everything is very calming to the senses. It is a delight. When you listen to birds, when you listen to the sound of water flowing by, you are instantly transfixed and transformed. You're in another space, mentally, spiritually, and even physically. And now, of course, this is something that scientists are now showing. Being in nature for just 20 minutes changes our brainwaves in the same manner that deep meditation changes our brainwaves and helps give our brains a good, needed rest. And then, of course, the heart and all these other things that it does. So I've been very fortunate because my senses are still quite sharp. And that's the blessing of Mother Nature.
No, as you're talking, I'm reminded of probably the time that I was closest to nature, which was me and a very dear friend of mine. We had traveled to the Amazon forests, and this is the Colombian side of it. And we were doing an overnight trek, with one of those local tribals to guide us. And we'd walked for about 2-3 hours deep into the forest. And there was a point where, we were next to a stream, and it was very silent, and one couldn't hear anything. And he actually asked us to switch off our torchlights because he was worried we were going to distract alligators in the stream. But for about 5 minutes, we were just in the middle of the forest without any light. We couldn't see anything. We could only hear the forest. And what up until then, to me, I thought was a very silent forest. And it's a very dense forest. Like, for example, at 3 p.m, you need a torch to walk inside, because there is a canopy above you. It's actually broad daylight, but no light comes into the forest. Right? But the moment we switched off the light, we could hear everything. And we had to switch off the light to be able to get into that zone. And suddenly what I thought was a silent forest, I realized for that ecosystem, that was like the center of Manhattan. I'm listening to animals, to birds, to bees, to the stream and everything. Like it was like a surround sound of everything that was happening there. Right? I don't think it's I resonate with what you said in terms of what it does to rebuilding your brain. But I interrupted your answer to what it takes to build a sanctuary. You were saying it was not virgin land,
no.
But recovering land, and that's how we sort of digressed into something else. But let's say you buy this land in Kodagu. What else do you need to do? What does it take from you to build it to the SAI that is there today?
Okay, so first, the land that was here was not virgin land either, at all. Virtually all of the land that has become part of SAI Sanctuary was abandoned plantation land. And it had been either decades ago oranges or some type of citrus, or cardamom or coffee. Now, in our area, years and decades ago, when there was so much more rainfall, there was almost no coffee here. It was almost all cardamom. And cardamom loves wet, shaded areas. So the lands that we bought that were formerly cardamom were in relatively decent shape because the previous owners had not cut down all of the great-grandmother trees. They needed them for shading, for the cardamom, and also for the rain that these great-great-grandmother trees produce. But wherever coffee had been introduced, the land had been pretty much decimated. The coffee was not being shaded except sporadically here and there. And those lands were in very bad shape because with the rainfall we have here and without the canopy to break up the rain and without the canopy's roots to hold onto the topsoil and absorb the excess water that would come down literally in buckets, especially when we were first here, the first 10, 15 years, the topsoil was gone, washed away. And in the coffee areas, it was a very bad situation. And then without the canopy again, the soil gets baked in the dry season and becomes as hard as rock. So in order to help these areas in particular to recover, we had to plant a lot of native trees in these areas, not exotics, not things like silver oak or that type of thing, but native trees that are native of the area. And we got that knowledge from indigenous people and local people and from Mother Nature, because wherever there were the big ancient great-grandmother trees above the cardamom, those were the kind of trees that were here originally. And we did have to buy saplings, but we also, especially as time went by, we were able to take the excess saplings under these great-grandmother trees and use them to help the forest recover specifically and especially in the coffee areas. So that was a lot of work. And that took many, many years. Then in addition to that, we had to protect the lands from cattle. Now, initially we had cattle. We had 28 head of cattle at one time. And yeah, a lot of cows, a lot of water buffaloes. And that's why we built biogas plants. And I still to this day cook on biogas. And we have on the corners of the sanctuary, natural wetland areas. Initially, we did grow rice in 2 sections of the sanctuary on the edges. But eventually, we stopped that practice because we did not want to be in conflict with any kind of wildlife. Although the elephants were really good with us, we had a silent agreement with the elephants that in one section of our rice fields, they could take everything above the seed case, where we planted for the rice seedlings, but to leave the rest below for us. They honored that agreement, that silent agreement. I know it sounds crazy.
Tell us how this works. How do you communicate this to them?
Okay, we started doing this in Hawaii. It goes all the way back there. In Hawaii, we had feral pigs that were introduced by the Polynesians or Tahitians, whichever ended up coming over first. And what we told the feral pigs was, you can eat all the vivee and everything you want around our land, and we will protect you from hunters, but leave our organic garden areas alone. We saw this with the feral pigs. They never went into our organic gardens there. Even though there wasn't anything around them to stop them from going in and raiding them. The other thing that we did was we planted sunflowers all around on the edges of that garden area. And we made a mental agreement with the birds. Said, these sunflowers are all for you. Eat all the sunflowers you want, but please leave our vegetable garden alone. they honored the agreement. And they ate all the sunflowers that we sowed all the way around the edges of the garden and left our vegetables alone. So here we did the same thing with the elephants, and they honored the agreement. The one who wasn't honoring the agreement were the crows. They were coming and taking out the newly planted rice out of the soil and then eating it. So my husband said, "Give me some cooked rice." And so we put the cooked rice on the side of the fields and again said to them mentally, "Here, have all this that you want. It's nice organic cooked rice, but leave our seedlings alone." From that point onwards, they didn't take out any of the seedlings and they enjoyed the rice. Up to this day, they still enjoy some cooked rice every day. So that kind of gives you an idea. And I know that I'm not the only person that has had these kinds of experiences. Animals are unbelievably psychic. Anyone who has pets knows that. My cats are so psychic, they can be outside and I will think, "Where are you?" And within just a few minutes, I will have them at my window meowing at me. And it's the same with the wildlife. In Hawaii, we had an experience with dolphins where we were going around the north shore of the oldest island there, Kauai. And I really, really, really wanted to experience swimming with the dolphins. And on the way out, there were no dolphins. And so on the way back, just kept praying, "Please come, please come, please come."
I'm sorry, what do you mean told them?
Mentally.
Okay.
Okay. We're all part of Mother Nature. And this, again, is Native American, but it is also Vedic teaching, the Upanishads, the Vedas, and it's actually a teaching amongst all cultures, especially indigenous and all religions, if you strip away all of the other stuff. We're all connected, and we all have the ability to reconnect through what Native Americans would call the Great Spirit. And by concentrating and meditating and putting out this request to a particular species with a particular agreement, they can and do receive it, and they will honor it. A lot of dolphins with lots of babies came, and we were able to switch off the motor of our Zodiac, floating Zodiac boat and get into the water and swim with the dolphins, put our head under the water and hear all of their clicking and squealing. The mothers being careful to keep the babies just out of our reach so we wouldn't touch, and having a fantastic time. We were in the water with them for like 40 minutes or more. It was just the most wonderful experience. And so they are extremely psychic. And I've seen this experience again and again and again. So that's why I say these silent agreements can work. But you also have to share. You have to be willing to share. Ultimately, every square inch of land that we've taken over for growing food is land that was once a forest area for wildlife. Therefore, it is only fair that we share some of the produce that we're getting from these lands with the wildlife, either in the manner that I'm talking about or in helping to reclaim some of these areas that have been abandoned and help reforest these areas again so Mother Nature can feed her other children, the other species of the earth that we share the earth with. So that gives you an idea of how these silent agreements work.
It does. And I have so many thoughts and questions in my head basis what you said. At one side, I'm thinking, these everyday miracles that we know happens with our pets. We somehow don't think much of them, right? We don't celebrate them much. And we're not in awe of them anymore. And then on the other side, I'm also thinking about something that you write in your book, right? And you often refer to the relationship with animals as both physical and spiritual in nature. So more than anything else in my mind right now, and I'll come to you with very specific questions. I want to talk to you about your idea of faith.
My idea of faith. I was raised in a Christian family, but then, of course, there was the influence of my Native American mom with that. And I also had an extremely wonderful minister who appropriately, his name was Father Best, B-E-S-T, the best minister. And he helped sow the love of nature and the connection between God and specifically Christ in nature when I was very young. Every Christmas, he would give a sermon, which would be a story about some animal in nature or a tree or a plant that had a connection with Christ, whether it was the original Christmas tree, whether it was the animals that gave the cow that gave up its manger, whether it was the doves above that would sing Christ to sleep, whether it was the oak tree, the dogwood tree, that eventually its wood became part of the cross. And there are just so many stories he told. And they really sowed these seeds of the connection of Christ with nature. I was not brought up Catholic. I was brought up Episcopalian or Anglican. But I've always loved St. Francis, always absolutely loved St. Francis, and always connected with him in that respect because he's the patron saint of animals. So the seeds were sown early from that point of view. As far as faith is concerned, the concept of the one spirit enveloping us all and us being a part of it and it being within us and without us, that is something that is common both to the Christian faith, and I make a point of saying the Gnostic Christian faith, as well as to Vedanta, as well as to Native Americans and many other faiths around the world too. We are on this planet for a very short time when you consider how old the planet is, how old creation is. So there has to be something more than just this tiny little interval between our birth and our death, both before and after. It was my husband who helped me fill in the gaps there too when I met him. As I mentioned, his mother was the guru of an ashram, and her guru was a disciple of Sri Aurobindo from Pondicherry. And he was the one, when I had all of these burning questions, I wrote him letters. I don't understand this because Christianity has taught me this and what. And he sent me books very often in response. The best and most wonderful one was the Gita, because that helped to fill in things, and Aurobindo's writings, where Aurobindo says nature, and in the Gita also, it says that nature is the outer vesture of the divine. And that is something that I haven't just understood intellectually. I have spiritually understood it, spiritually experienced it, spiritually seen it. Being connected with wildlife, being in the woods and feeling as if you were a part of everything. And if you move, there is a reaction to your action by one of the animals there. And it's almost like you're feeling a tug onto yourself or a slight push on yourself when the actions and reactions take place. So it's not just something that has been put in intellectually. They have been spiritual experiences, because that is really the goal in all faiths, is to have these experiences, have the experiences spiritually that you have faith exist. But faith is not the same as experiencing. Faith is kind of a hoping, whereas the experiencing is the experiencing. It's then sure, you know that it actually exists. You know that the law of karma is as evident as the law of gravity here on Earth. You throw something up, it comes down. When you are doing something karmically, you throw something out, it comes back at you, whether it's good or bad. It may take a while to get to you, but it will come back to you one way or the other. So that gives you some concept of my view of faith. The Native Americans also, the Osage were a very, well, their tribe has been decimated, but they are recovering. The Osage are a very, very spiritual people. And they viewed all of nature as part of their family. The same way today people are talking about mountains and giving them personhood, or rivers and personhood. This was the norm for most Native American tribes. This was the norm. This is the way they normally viewed aspects of nature, as brothers and sisters, extended family. When you have that kind of a mindset, when you have that belief and that faith, and then that experience, that the Spirit does connect you, the Great Spirit does connect you to everything and everyone, there is no way you cannot want to do the right thing. There's no way you can ignore that your action is impinging on part of your family. And if we have that kind of a mindset and change our view of nature as being apart from nature into being a part of nature, then we view it as family members. And once you view as family members, you want to protect, you want to love, you want to share, you want to respect, versus exploiting, destroying, or not caring about what we're doing or what is happening all around us. The goal of life is to experience that Great Spirit here on Earth. This is what the great mystics in the Himalayas have done for generations upon generations. That was one of the reasons why I'm so glad we had at least 10 years up in the Himalayas, was to feel that vibration of the holy Himalayas. There's just something so special up there, and it's a tangible feeling. It's an uplifting feeling when you are up there. And we've had extraordinary experiences there as well. I don't know, have you ever been to the Himalayas?
Many times, yes.
Okay, then you have to have gone to Bhojvasa and to Galmuk.
I've not been there. No.
Oh, well, next time, make sure you go. We went to Galmuk, and before we had left, there was an interesting encounter with my husband and an ashram, head of an ashram. We needed a place to stay. And because I am not of Indian origin, he hesitated and wouldn't let us stay. And my husband said, "You of all people should not be judging someone by the outer shell, by the outer garment. You should be looking more carefully into the inner heart before you decide who should and who shouldn't stay in the ashram." That led to a long discussion between the two of them. And of course, I was invited to stay anytime we wanted to stay. But what he did say was something very interesting, this monk. He said that you see all of these rocks around the Holy Ganga here. People from outside the area that don't understand just see these as rocks. They're not rocks. They are the spirits of sages still doing tapas to Mother Ganga. Now, as we were walking toward Bhojvasa and towards Kalmukh, you round a corner and all of a sudden you see the Bhagirathi mountain peak. I stopped in my tracks when I saw that. There is a face on the Bhagirathi mountain. There is no way you can deny it. The peak, it has, you can see the two eyes, the nose, the mouth, everything is there. And I said to our guide who was going with us, I said, there's some face on the mountain peak. And he said, oh, yes. And he said, yes, some people say that it is Shiva taking the weight of Ganga in his matted locks as she comes from heaven and then flows down to become the Gangotri glacier. And he says, others say that it is King Bhagirath who has done tapas in order to bring Mother Ganga down, that he is in a deep state of meditation. There were some other extraordinary features in the rocks as well. One was a triangular shaped face that had two eyes and a mouth open like an O. There was a line down its chin and an Om in the rock. These are natural rock formations. I still have photos of them that are absolutely extraordinary. So this is what the great mystics here in India have been saying for eons and generations, that the world is a gift, life is a gift, but the gift needs to be used in a proper way. We need to discover that spiritual aspect of ourselves that is within, that is the same before we took on this bodily dress and will be the same after we've left this bodily dress. If we can experience that consciously, then we will have really achieved the goal of life and living. And once that is achieved, you can never do anything wrong again, because you realize we're all one and the same, all children of the one creator God. Long-winded explanation.
No, it's listening to you is a kind of meditation itself. And listening to you talk about what faith is most definitely is. The more you talk, right, the more I'm reminded of probably one of my most favorite quotes ever, which is of Einstein. And everyone talks about spirituality and science as opposing things, but it actually is not. And then he says, when someone asked him about the details of the special theory of relativity or something else, I forget now, his answer was, I'm interested in God's thoughts. The rest are details, right? They don't mean much. I just want to understand the larger picture. Right? So, yes. So that's what I was reminded of as we were talking. Just going back to the story itself, right? I think some of the things that are in my mind are, you spoke about farming in the land and how it is something that you have to give back at some point because you're taking something off the wildlife. What is the economics of doing what you do, right? And is this the sanctuary that you're building? Was that also your means of sustenance for all these years? Is that how it worked for you? We were basically somewhat self-sufficient, especially when we had the cattle and we had the gobar and the dung for the biogas and the rice, milks, et cetera, et cetera. We also chickens and et cetera, et cetera. We're vegetarian though. Okay, just the chickens were not for killing, they were for eggs. So in any case, and plenty of vegetables. We have greenhouses, a couple of greenhouses for growing as well. We gifted the cattle about 10 years or more ago to neighbors who were economically challenged, because I, in particular, wanted to stop having the cattle
in the sanctuary because it meant that we had to have people to care for the cattle. That required bringing in people from outside. And then you have the challenge of trying to make people from outside understand why you don't litter, why you don't hurt, why you don't kill. And it inhibited the wildlife from coming out into the sanctuary except at night. So what we've done now, because we are not growing our own rice, et cetera, and have for quite some time now, we buy organic produce and rice and milk and the gober from our neighbors. This gives them a form of income, and it allows us to leave the sanctuary completely and wholly to wildlife. As far as how we run the sanctuary economically, my husband made most of our money, almost all of it, abroad when we were living in the US and brought it over here. So this is an unusual circumstance for most people, although we've worked our entire lives. It's still, that is where most of our money came from. And so we basically have been living on a fixed income as a result of that. Of course, with interest rates going down, I'm really crying as far as my income is concerned, but still, that is how we've been living. We've also had a small ecotourism homestay situation, which helps out a little bit. But with the COVID and everything, that's been closed now for a few years. As far as people are concerned, whether it's the planters here that need to have their coffee and cardamom produce enough so that they earn a living, or farmers in other parts of India, there are ways of working with Mother Nature, and that will actually help them and help stop animal-human conflict. One of the ways is, first of all, to reintroduce shading of native trees back into your farming areas. This is really critically important because with climate change, temperatures are rising dramatically. And that sun that beats down on the earth is just turning our precious topsoil to sand. Even in this state, Karnataka, we're second only to Rajasthan in the process of desertification. Our precious topsoil is drying out and then blowing away with the hot winds. And then it doesn't matter, like chemicals, all chemicals do is puff up your foods and return some nitrogen to the soil, but not in a natural manner. They don't bring back life into the soil. So to bring back life into your soil, you need these native trees from the area wherever you're located in the country, because the leaves will be full of all the nutrients as they break down into the soil and help rebuild that topsoil. We have sponsored organic workshops here for the planters and growers of the area so that they could learn these and actually see them in organic plantations. Some of our friends here who are PhD scientists show it all in their own plantations, growing in an organic manner and being very abundant. One of the other things is introducing what some people call breathing spaces in between larger areas of your plantations or farming areas. This wild area where you leave some bushes and things like that alone is great for attracting birds that are great predators for the pests that attack plants. And they also, the pests that would normally go on your vegetables or your rice or whatever it is, they also will go into these breathing spaces instead, because they have tastier things to munch on than just the same old. So these are other things that people can do. in order to enhance their soil and enhance their productivity. Another thing that's really, really important is bringing back our riparian areas, our river areas, by planting native trees along those areas. This will help keep the rivers flowing. It will help keep the soils moist, including during the dry season, and help rainfall, because in our equatorial rainforest belt, where most of India is located, over 50% of the rainfall comes from the forest itself. And this, they've done scientific studies to show that this is true. It's done through evapotranspiration, where the roots of the trees suck up water from underground and bring them up through the leaves, and then transpire the water vapor during the process of photosynthesis. And the trees and mushrooms and flora of the forests spew forth a potassium salt, which acts as the core around which this water vapor coalesces to produce rainfall. And because everything has its own unique chemical signature, just like our fingerprints, none are alike, this is the same for potassium salts. So when rainfall falls, you can take the rainfall, check it under microscopes, and see, did this potassium salt originate from the forest? Or did this potassium salt originate from water that evaporated from the Arabian Sea or the Indian Ocean or something like that? Because the chemical signature is different. And this is how they have determined that over 50% in these areas of the globe in particular, the rainfall comes from the forests themselves. So by taking care of our riverways in the proper areas, now there are some areas where you don't want to have the trees. So you have to find out what was natural and native in that area before we disturbed it, before we destroyed it, and then try helping it to rebuild itself. Biological migration corridors, again, building these by planting the right trees, increasing the buffer zones around your protected areas, your government protected areas, helping to piece those fragmented protected areas back through private forest sanctuaries like ours. These kinds of things will help all of the country and all of our farmers and all of every industry we have, because every industry is dependent on water. And by doing this, you will enhance the soil, because you've got all of these wonderful native trees with their leaves coming down. You teach about composting so that people that make the soil alive again, which will produce more vegetables, rice, whatever it is. You avoid growing moisture guzzling crops in areas that are dry, like sugarcane and others, or even certain rices. They guzzle the water up, and you should try and change over to things that are more adaptive to drier climates. This is where our farmers need help. If we will do this kind of working with Mother Nature, we will revive the soils, we will revive our waterways, we will have our monsoons in a timely fashion, our waters will run year round, our production for our foods will become much, much higher, and the exports will then be able to kick in too, especially if they're organic, because organic fetches a much higher price, especially abroad. And our manufacturing and all of the other, whether it's healthcare, education, whatever it is, all of these things will benefit from these simple things working with nature. Another long-winded answer for you.
You know, it was fascinating listening to you about farming and rainfall. I want to, just digress a little bit and talk to you about the animals in the sanctuary, and especially this one image which I don't necessarily associate with Coorg, which is your otter. Tell us a little bit about the wildlife that has inhabited your sanctuary and what that journey has been.
We have all kinds of wildlife. And again, ever since we gifted our cattle away, now the wildlife comes out in the middle of the day. And it's such a joy to be able to watch. We have the biggest of your grazers, whether they're elephants or the Indian bison, the gaur, or sambar, which is also the largest deer in Asia, the chital or spotted deer, muntjak, which is the barking deer, the tiny little mouse deer. We've got the wild boar. We have all different kinds of snakes, including cobras. And they've been very good. Nobody's ever been bitten. So, you respect you respect them, they respect you. You respect them, they respect you. Hundreds of species of birds and butterflies that come through. And predators. We have the top predators. We have a few tigers that regularly visit the sanctuary. Leopard, dhole, or the Indian wild dog also. And so we have the whole chain of life, whole tapestry of life here. One of my favorites, without question, are the otters. I love otters. And the otters that we have here and have had are the small-clawed river otters. Now, they're smaller than the smooth-coated, which you will see the smooth-coated up in like Corbett National Park or things like that. These are smaller, but they are very, very, very endangered. And some of the otter experts that have been here and come through our sanctuary and the Brahmagiri Wildlife Sanctuary we border have stated and said that our sanctuary and just up in the Brahmagiri are like the only really good habitats left for the small-clawed river otter, which is really, really sad. They are so much fun to watch, and they are so much fun to experience. Yeah, they are just a joy. I'll share one experience. I was going around to our camera traps, and I instantly heard this high-pitched, it's this high-pitched chirp. I said, oh my goodness, otters, that too, and their babies, because their pitch is much higher than their parents. So I very quietly came to what is our largest pond in the river here. I call it our elephant pond because even in the dry season, it's over the heads of the elephants and quite large. Wow. And there was a mom and a dad and two little pups or kits, the babies are called. And they were having the time of their lives, just going around in the pond and enjoying themselves. And you know how dolphins or porpoises, they call it porpoising when they dive, like that is exactly what the otters do too. And so they were moving and moving, and I was sitting on the rocks that my husband and I would normally sit on whenever we were at that location. And there's bamboo in front of it. You can see through it, but the father kept getting closer and closer and closer. And he had seen me when I came, but I think he forgot I was still there. So I was taking all this wonderful video footage, and suddenly he went under the water, under the bamboo, literally in front of my feet, and came up on the rock that my feet were on. And he went, oh my goodness, this is too close. And he jumped off of the rock and went into the water and then got up afterwards and then started scolding me. They make like a sound when they're scolding you. It was like, you scared me. Why didn't you remind me that I was there? And so I had this wonderful close experience. And then he went and played some more. So they are just a joy. They are so much fun to watch. In one situation, we had the extended family of 10 otters at this big pond also, and they were playing, you know how kids and even adults who are still kids at heart will do jumps off of rocks and then thunderballs. I don't know what you call them here, where you hold onto your feet and you jump into the water and make a big splash and all of that, or jump on someone or anything. This is what they were doing. They were having the time of their lives, jumping off of the rocks onto each other, chasing each other. They're so much fun. And now what's really exciting is a couple years ago, I got some camera trap footage from right below our house, which is where the otters are very often there. And I looked at the otter and I said, this is not my small-clawed river otter. This is a different species. So I didn't know which kind because I'm not an otter expert. So I sent it to my otter expert friends. He said, my goodness, you have captured a Eurasian river otter on this photo. There have not been Eurasian otters in the area for over 100 years. They were all killed off for their pelts, for their fur. This is astonishing that you have a Eurasian river otter there. So now we have 2 different species that are raising their young here, which is really, really wonderful. And my hope and prayer is that we can help establish an otter sanctuary for this whole river area, because it will not only protect the otters, but it will help to protect all of the wildlife here, because the river is the magnet for the wildlife here, especially during the dry season. So river otters are in the same category as Bengal tigers, Schedule 1. Severely threatened, and Asian elephants. So we don't think about that a lot. We think of the big name animals, but they're in the same category. They're in the same category. So whatever we can do to help out the otters, first of all, gives me tremendous joy. I just love them. They're the most fun-loving. One adolescent otter didn't know I was above him on the cliff above him. And I started filming him. And he was just having fun going under the water and blowing bubbles. And then coming up, shaking his head, going under the water again, just blowing his bubbles and shaking his head. It was hilarious. Just such a joyful experience for me, and such joy of life exhibited by these wonderful, wonderful creatures.
I did not even know otters were endemic to that part of the world. Yeah, it's fabulous. So, from when you started to now, what is the change in fauna? I think 1991 is when you inhabited that place, right?
Yes.
At that point, did you have these many number of species, or have they naturally been drawn to this area?
Yeah, we did not have this number of species at all, which is why the camera traps are so critically important, because I can't be everywhere. And the camera traps are wonderful because, like with the new species of otter, they can record things and let us know what's there and in what quantities. So, for example, the Nilgiri marten has returned to our area. They're very rare. And of course, these otters. We have so many more. There were no tigers immediately in this area. They were in the Brahmachiri, but not here. Bird species, the gaur have come back. We had some gaur, but not like we have them now. So yes, there has been a huge increase, both in the number of the different species, as well as in the numbers in the individual species that have come here. And that is extremely rewarding to see. From a flora point of view, our protection of the forests has helped in every way to bring this back, bring these species back. Number one is the protection from the point of view of not allowing hunting, making sure there are no snares, because you do have to go through the sanctuary to remove snares that poor animals get strangled with. And protecting the trees. We don't remove any of the trees that fall down. Number one, this is a great way of keeping carbon still captured, because then it disintegrates over a period of time. Number two, it becomes a wonderful area where bushes and things and plants grow and becomes a great habitat for birds or butterflies or small mammals. So this is another example of why protection and not disturbance in any manner helps so much in letting Mother Nature do her thing. We give a helping hand, but basically after a period of time, we've been able to just let her do her thing. And then with the return of the elephants, which was very critically important, they have helped to resow all of the most important trees in the sanctuary and in the Brahmagiri, et cetera, because they're the only ones that can swallow the large seeds of the biggest trees whole and then pass them with their dung, instant fertilizer, to regrow the forest area.
Which is why you're saying it's critically important that they came back.
Yes. It's the, on the one hand, it's the seeds also from our natural grass areas. We have natural meadows and we have natural wetlands. The various grazers like the gaur or the deer, various deer species, they sow seeds also while they're traveling, but it's the elephants. Without the elephants, we don't have forests. Without the elephants, you don't have the best carbon capturing trees because those are the ones with the biggest seeds. So where elephants are no longer seen or available, these trees are disappearing. And therefore, our forests are not as efficient at capturing carbon to help us mitigate climate change, cushion us against the effects of climate change. And they're the best also from the point of view of producing rainfall and the best in helping the canopy break up the rain when it falls to control flooding. These trees are critically important. And to keep them, you have to have the elephants. They've done studies showing the elephants will travel 100 kilometers in just a couple days, whereas cattle, first of all, can't eat the same seeds. Their dung is not anywhere near as efficient in seed production that actually produces plants, and they go around in the same approximate 5 to 7 kilometer radius. So the elephants cannot be replaced. They can't be replaced.
Wow. I can keep listening to you for another 2 hours and still have more questions. It is fascinating at so many levels. I want to probably close with a couple of things, right? And extremely grateful that you wrote the book, and that is, I think, probably your way of passing on this knowledge to the next generation and then later on. But I wanted to ask you something probably very, very, very personal. And, you can choose to answer it or not. It's been 30 years for you, right?
Yes.
More than that, probably, yeah, in Sanctuary. And how do you feel about what you have accomplished?
I feel very satisfied that so much good has happened. I have to say, without my husband, none of it would have been possible. And without his determination and his stubbornness to never give up on turning this dream of mine into a reality, none of this would have been able to happen. So this sanctuary really is a testimony. It's his living legacy. As far as how I feel about it, I'm ecstatic when I'm outside and experiencing the nature around me. When I have a butterfly flit across my face or a bird singing or any of these wonderful, joyous times, it is so uplifting and so gratifying. It has been difficult. I'll give you an example briefly. We haven't been without our controversy, that's for sure. We haven't been without those who don't want us here, like those involved in the illegal wild meat trade and illegal loggers. So we have had our problems, we've had our detractors. And there have been times, not so after my husband passed away in particular, that there were some incidents that happened that I can't take it anymore. Then when I walked back into the sanctuary, I was greeted by the cross species langur family that has made SAI Sanctuary its home. This is in the book too. It's a fascinating story of a gray langur mom and her baby, and a Nilgiri langur, highly endangered male, coming to the sanctuary at different times, and now they're a family, and now they have a new addition. They were there, and the older sibling, the female that came with its mom, her mom first, is a friend. And by friend, I mean you don't want to encourage them by touching or anything like that, but comes down and says hello to me all of the time whenever she sees me. And I looked at them and I thought to myself, if I don't protect this, where will they go? Where will they go? Anyone that I would sell this to, not anyone, I would hope things are changing, but most people that I would sell this to would end up chopping it all down. Where will they go? So that is, when I look out onto the canopy from the roof of our building, I wonder how much longer all of this is going to stay green. I'm hoping and praying, and especially with people of the younger generation, like yourself and others who love nature so much, I'm hoping and praying that they will take up the cause and help and spread the news, spread the message, do it themselves in whatever capacity that they can, getting businesses involved, etc. These are my hopes and my dreams, because the future of the forest is at stake, and the wildlife, and their future is our future also. We can't live without a viable ecosystem, without Mother Nature giving us all the things we need to survive. And the country can't survive either without the beauty, the wonder, and all of the ecosystem services that Mother Nature provides to us. So I just hope and pray that those who understand this will continue to make their voices and presence felt in whatever ways they can, in whatever parts of society that they can, so that we can look our children in the eye and say, we did the best we could. There are two things I'd like to leave with you. One is the Native American concept of the seventh generation. This is a concept where it's stated, every decision we make today, we must think of the impact it will have on the seventh generation hence. So when we cut down the forest, when we denotify, when we do whatever the things are that are destructive, how is that going to impact that generation hence? And another thought, we do not inherit this earth from our forefathers. We are borrowing it from our children. If we can have that kind of long-term view, it can change our actions virtually instantaneously.
Those are extraordinarily powerful words. It changes perspective.
Yes.
On everything. Yeah. Against every voice in my head, I want to draw this conversation to a close. You've spoken, as you speak a lot. Right? I'm reminded of this thing that I've always read and understood. I thought I understood up until now, which is you can plant trees, but you can't grow a forest, right? Because that's an ecosystem, right? Yeah. And that comes with knowledge, and that comes with time, and a lot of love, with all of which you have sort of passed on to the land in which you are at this point. You've spoken a lot about Anil and you, and it's an extraordinary love story, and about everything that you guys have done together, right? And you also spoken in many places about what is loss means to you, and how even until his last minute. He was actually editing the last chapter of your book. I want to end in a more happier sort of a fashion, but still talking about you guys. What are some of the fondest memories that you have in the sanctuary? What did you guys love to do together?
Oh, my husband was the original tree hugger. He called our trees, every tree, love posts. And he would put his arms around the trees and hug them. Actually, now science has found out that actually does ground us, EMF grounding. And that was always something that I enjoyed with him. He loved to hug those trees. We loved walking through the forest, and we loved swimming in the river together also. That was something that we truly, truly, truly enjoyed. It was one of our favorite things to do. And on our days off, generally speaking, we would go to that elephant pond and we would go and swim. And it was a good long swim back and forth. And then we would sit in meditation. Some of our most joyous times have been in nature and sharing those spiritual moments together. It's like having one soul in two bodies. And those types of feelings and experiences always, always fill me with joy and fill my heart with joy. One of the favorite music group, they're oldies. They're called the Moody Blues. And yes, of course, especially their first 7 albums. The last music that we listened to was at the Moody Blues on his birthday, and Nights in White Satin, and also the album Every Good Boy Deserves Favor. And the last song there, it says, "Where did I find all these words? Something inside of me is burning. There's life in other worlds. Maybe they'll come to earth, helping men to find the way." And it ends with, "I'm going to sing my song and sing it all day long, a song that never ends. How can I tell you all the things inside my head?" My husband just kept singing that and singing it and singing it for the next several days. So those are some of the experiences that we've had together, the most joyous. And they're the precious memories that I treasure. And I do have the belief and faith that when people love each other to such a depth and experience spiritual things together to such a depth, that we will be together when I drop this, whenever that occurs. So I hope that gives you some idea of some of the most wonderful experiences we've had.
It does. And, the only sentence that keeps coming back to my head, as I listen to you is a life so beautifully lived. So, yeah, congratulations. And
thank you.
And Pam, thank you so much for sharing a bit of that journey with us. And like I said, it's just listening to you is it's a bit of a spiritual experience in itself. And thank you so much. I wish I could visit you at some point,
of course,
and see the magic with my own eyes. Yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. It was a joy.
Our pleasure.
So that was our show this week. I hope you liked it. And if you did, and if you're a fan of the show, hey, I have something to ask of you. If you are listening to the show on Spotify or Apple right now, please do rate us on the respective app. It helps a lot in others discovering the show. And if you have any feedback on the show, I would love to hear from you. You can send it to filterkoffeepodcast@gmail.com. Happy listening, and see you next week with another episode.
Do you wonder why China does the things that it does? Or want to know how we could improve online privacy? Or perhaps you're thinking about how we can kickstart India's economy. If you'd like to search for the answers to such questions, check out All Things Policy, a daily public policy podcast that covers everything from employment figures to aircraft carriers. Tune in from Monday to Friday for new episodes and fresh takes.
Love fighting?
We've got you covered.
Check out our show, The Fighting Goat, where we, the voices of the internet, Arjun Chipalkatti and Somesh Kamra, bring to you crazy weekly action on your favorite combat show, The Fighting Goat.
Be it commentary, breakdown, predictions, analysis of styles and techniques.
And of course, your round of favorite fighters.
You can listen to us every Thursday on the IBM Podcast app, website, and all major podcast streaming platforms.